Hi, Sara, welcome. Hello. Hi,
Hello,
welcome.
thank you. How are you?
Fine, you?
I'm fine, great.
Great. Are you ready?
Yes, more or less. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Were you in the plenary last night?
Yes.
Because I was trying to speak, but I think that no one could hear me. So
Yeah,
I sent an
exactly.
email and I trying to fix the technical things.
Yeah, I saw, but don't worry. Maybe try this evening to engage into the plenary, and maybe let's see if there are some problems. But now I think that if you are here, there are no problems.
Okay, great.
Va bene,
Sì, sì.
non c'è più.
So let's wait one moment.
Is there anything we have to try before the panel start?
Yes, I think that if you start to share the screen,
Uh-huh. Okay, great,
if you have some slide.
great.
So welcome instead from the newcomers.
Can you see the PowerPoint slide?
Yes, yes,
Okay. And
perfectly.
can you see anything else or just the PowerPoint?
We see the like the bottom and the top of the screen.
Okay,
So I don't know. Yeah.
but you cannot see like I mean, the other programs I have open,
No,
right?
no, 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 no.
Okay, great.
Try to slide to go ahead with. Okay, perfect. It's going.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yes,
Perfect.
great. So,
Now let's wait another few minutes,
mhm.
and maybe before starting, let's see if we have time. I want to share an interview to um, an indigenous from Ashaninka. I don't know if you know the tribe
No.
that was sharing an experience of how COVID is going nowadays.
Uh-huh.
And just share the screen, seeing the video over that is talking in Spanish but translated
Okay.
um, about the situation or about COVID and so on. Okay.
And also the round table is going to be in the same link, right? Or do we have
Exactly,
to?
exactly. No, no,
Okay.
we do not have to change.
Okay.
We stay just the ones from the other call will come here.
Uh-huh. So when I finish, just I mean, like continue with
Exactly.
another because I prepare like a little presentation with 2 or 3 slides.
Okay.
So yeah, to change. Okay, great.
Now let's wait also the people can join.
Okay.
Okay. I start share just this brief presentation about this Ashaninka girl. And Ashaninka is a tribe that is inside Peru. And actually, they are struggling for COVID as several indigenous people. I will take just 3 minutes of the video, then we will reprise the video during the indigenous roundtable. And then I will give the floor to Sara Garcia that is here with us.
Hello.
So I welcome Sara. Thank you for joining. I will take just 3 minutes of the video and then we will start. Tell me if you can. Do you hear the sound now? Yes.
Primeramente, agradecer por esta invitación. Es un honor estar con ustedes compartiendo la situación de los pueblos indígenas en América Latina. Especialmente soy del pueblo Ashaninka de Perú. Vamos a traducir textos en diferentes lenguas para que la población indígena pueda informarse de qué se trata este tipo de pandemia, cuáles son el protocolo que debe tomar o que debe asumir cada familia, ¿no? Esto un poco es el mensaje que llega en la radio, televisión, internet, algunos síntomas, pero han sabido acudir rápidamente a la medicina tradicional, a la familia, hombres y mujeres que saben de la medicina tradicional, y hemos tenido, digamos, algunas hierbas de la Amazonía, y se ha tratado con eso porque hemos rápidamente agarrado que es una gripe que no es común y normal como las otras gripes, sino esta gripe es como triple veces más fuerte que va a llegar en cada individuo. Entonces, como ya nosotros tenemos ese conocimiento de medicina tradicional, muchas de las familias se han tratado con esa hierba. Pero ya la realidad del pueblo Ashaninka, donde tiene que llevar más de 8 horas en bote por río, por carretera, otro medio por vuelo, donde no hay carretera. Entonces, esa familia que nosotros tenemos en su mundo, están en su área normal, están yendo a la chacra, cultivando, haciendo cosas, pero como el Estado llega ya en las comunidades, como por ejemplo los profesores, rápidamente se ve que no llegan los profesores, ¿no? ¿Por qué razón? Hay una cosa emergencia. Entonces la población recién empieza a tomar conciencia. ¿Por qué se ausenta el profesor o el docente? ¿Por qué no va un enfermero que viene, ¿no? Desde un lugar a otro, que no es de la misma zona, porque es la difícil situación en cuestión de implementación? En las comunidades nativas no hay un buen hospital, no hay una buena posta, y mucho menos las escuelitas están bien hechas.
Okay. We have heard this, told about this Ashaninka girl that is now struggling for COVID. Just to introduce the session of human rights, ecocide, and also the rights of nature and together with our speakers, that will be Sara Garcia in this room and Marco Bertaglia in the other room, will address the problem of also how the right of nature is also a human right. So we'll give the floor suddenly to Sara Garcia Garrido. So thank you for being here, Sara.
No, thank you for inviting me.
And
So
so the
may
floor
I
is
start
yours.
the presentation?
Sure.
Great. So I'm going to share. Can you see my presentation?
Yes,
Okay, great.
go ahead.
So I start by introducing the topic, the right of the nature with rights are also human rights. I start by introducing what is biodiversity loss. We all know that the wolf, fish, birds, mammal, amphibian, and reptile population have declined by approximately 70% between 1970s and 2014, and this is the most recent year for which data are available. Also, according to WWF Living Planet Index, the decline affects nature's role in providing the world with fresh air and clean water, as well as other vital services that are also basic human rights. According to the latest report from the Intergovernmental Science and Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, there are five main drivers behind the decline in biodiversity change in land and sea use. Also, direct exploitation of organisms, climate change, pollution, and invasive species. Also, government action to address these issues, such as biodiversity loss, fell short last year, and millions of frustrated people all around the world participated in numerous worldwide protests calling for greater protection for the planet. The failure of countries to make progress in negotiations at the COP25 in December last year in Madrid sum up what was kind of a very disappointing year. And end with shame of glory for a summit that began with the hashtag time for action, but could not see any action despite the negotiations delayed its closure by approximately 40 hours. This 25th United Nations Climate Summit have five main goals. The first one was to restart the international carbon market. The second one, find money to deal with the loss and damage caused by climate change. Also make a roadmap for long-term financing from developed to developing countries. Hold developed countries accountable for climate action that must be taken before the Paris Climate Agreement comes into force. And the most important, in my opinion, that was integrate gender, human rights, and indigenous rights components into all climate action. The failure of this summit means that the Paris Agreement of 2015 entered into force in early 2020, prevented by the lack of budget. And the promises made in Paris by most developing countries to control carbon emissions and adapt them to climate impacts depend on money from industrialized countries. And now they have no idea where that money will come from. They committed to limit global warming to 2 Celsius degrees and compared to pre-industrial levels. However, according to national contribution and known as NDCs already submitted by most countries, the world is heading for increases of between 3 to 4 Celsius degrees. And then what happened this year? The pandemic came. So this year, busy agenda of negotiation on climate change, biodiversity, and the global ocean was supposed to address the fate of a ill will, but the coronavirus pandemic is forcing dramatic changes in the calendar. The coronavirus was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization in early this year, and it is certain to have a huge global impact, not only on health and well-being, but also on our societies, economies, and policies. I think it is worth thinking now about what the impact of the pandemic might be on climate change and climate actions in terms of emissions, global and also national policies, as well as social changes. I think that 2020 seems to be the year global temperatures are reaching record levels, the number of species at risk of extinction, extreme weather events became more frequent, and the level of oxygen in the ocean also is continuing to decrease. 2020 is definitely unfolding as what looks like a critical year for the environment. Another thing we should take into account is the relation in between the coronavirus and climate change, because it's something that is going to change from the short term to long term. Nowadays, we are seeing its positive sides these days because this leads to reduced emission due to less economic activity. I remember that it was everywhere in the first week of lockdowns all around the world. The only thing we could see was like a lot of images and videos on television, mainly on the increase of air quality, principally. But on the other hand, the outbreak is disrupting crucial international negotiations, potentially crippling the prospect for a sufficient international climate agreement. Remembering that we only have 10 years to limit a climate catastrophe from which global climate feedback cycles will be set in motion, I think it's kind of a thing to think about. In the short term, it is obvious that the main advantage could be, and it is, the reduction of the emissions due to less economic activity. And in the other hand, all the possible drawbacks in the long term include weakening the public political will for climate action and indeed encouraging an eventual increase in greenhouse emissions as governments seek to renew the global economy. A slight fall in the emissions does not really make a difference in the long term, but changing the overall increase in emission it is an important thing. Also, another thing is that human population density has been found to be a significant common predictor of emerging infectious disease events, and this supports the hypothesis that disease emergence is largely a product of anthropogenic changes, and it is some kind of hidden cost of human economic development. The fact is that there are many more of us in all settings. We go to places that are largely intact and are increasingly exposed. We are creating habitats where viruses are more easily transmitted, and then we are surprised we have new ones. The zoonotic diseases are linked to environmental change and human behavior, and the disruption of virgin forests by logging, mining, road building through remote location, also rapid urbanization and population growth, among other, is bringing people closer to animal species that also carry with them viruses and bacteria and parasites. And we have never been this close before. The difference also between now and a few decades ago, in addition to the frenetic mobility that contributes to globalization in every sense, it that diseases are likely to emerge in urban rather than in natural environments, because we are creating very dense population where bats, rodents, birds, pets, and among other living creatures are sharing spaces with us. And that creates a very intense interaction and opportunities for things to move from one species to others. Wildlife everywhere nowadays is being subjected to high level of stress due to major changes in landscape. This is causing animals to lose habitats, which means that species are crowding in and also coming into greater contact with humans. And not only animal species or plant species, but virus and bacteria and parasites that they carry with them. And building on this principle, I want to introduce you the dilution effect. Um, in response to the rapid loss of many population and even entire species with the global biodiversity crisis, there is a growing interest nowadays on the intersection between biodiversity loss and the emergencies of disease. The dilution effect is a hypothesis that suggests that the net effects of biodiversity reduce the risk of certain diseases in communities. It is known, for example, that in some rural communities, livestock are strategically placed near humans to distract malaria-carrying mosquitoes. And in other disease-ridden regions, similar roles have been suggested for rabbits in reducing sandfly-transmitted leishmaniasis, also cat and dogs in reducing mosquito-borne encephalitis, and also lizards in reducing tick-borne Lyme disease. So we came to the concept zooprophylaxis, which is the use of animals to protect people from infection. And it has been recognized for over a century and relies on the principle that livestock are the dead end host for many vector-borne infections that cause disease in humans. Even given the accelerating rate of population extirpation and species extinction associated with human activity, the idea that maintaining or even enhancing biodiversity could promote human and wildlife health, it's been generating a lot of interest in the last few months because of the coronavirus thing. Until now, virtually the only connection made between the coronavirus and ecology or the environment has been the reduction of greenhouse emission, as I told you in the slide before. However, the most important connection is precisely the opposite. It is not so much how the coronavirus affects the ecosystem and the environment, but how these affect the coronavirus. We are forgetting the important protective work against infections and epidemics and pandemics that a well-conserved nature play. A catastrophe must occur for some of us to bring in the newspaper, go to the library and write some scientific paper again and find reasons beyond ethics to conserve biodiversity. In my opinion, this taking advantage of the present moment should be one of the political pressure strategies we should be using and spreading right now. And I want to give you one more example. The protective function of ecosystem is being weakened by the climate change. One of the most studied is the loss of ice and frozen soils with global warming. The ice simply melts and in doing so releases all kinds of gases, many of them with a powerful greenhouse effect. And in addition to gases, they release viruses. The melting of permanently frozen soils, known as permafrost, in the northern areas is releasing viruses and bacteria that are very dangerous to humans, as was seen, for example, a few years ago with the anthrax outbreak in Russia. And the picture on the left is a new from the BBC on 2016, calling out the importance of permafrost. And finally, I think that an urgent response is needed in both the climate and the pandemic. Perhaps the immediacy of the coronavirus threat will make it easier to find that urgency, and the coronavirus pandemic is a global tragedy on a scale that is, even today, still uncertain. The possibilities are very difficult to understand, and it will certainly show some formidable practical problems for climate action. And maybe it will make it difficult to land the key changes we need to see at COP26 in November. But in the long run, I think if it leads to a deeper understanding of the ties that bind us all together on a global scale, it may help rather than hinder the possibility of humanity facing up to the climate crisis. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer if there's any questions, thoughts, or suggestions.
Thank you very much, Sara, for your intervention. And now I'll open the floor. If there are questions for Sara, you can write in the chat or raise your hand. So feel free, don't be shy, and take the chance to ask Sara some question about her intervention. Then we will have also a roundtable with other speakers together to address a little bit the problem also, for example, that Sara takes that, for example, the combination between COVID and other ecocides that somehow threaten the survival of the indigenous people and so on. So please. To break the ice, I have one question, Sara.
Okay.
I want to ask you if, in your opinion, indigenous people can now have some, like also evolution in their rights if the pandemic is addressed in the right way. For example, if in I don't know, Latin America or another part of the world, there are some signs in which we can take this situation that of course is critic to make an improvement also in their situation, and also for them, and also for the right of nature.
Yes, I think that it is very important to start from the basic thing that indigenous population protect almost 800% of biodiversity in the world. So from the moment you understand this, if you want to protect nature and you want to protect biodiversity, you have to protect indigenous population, and you should give more people to these communities to develop and to just to, I don't know, more power to them so they can manage the natural resources that were given in their land.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have another question, but I want to leave the floor to others, I don't know, participant, but I have another question for you.
Okay.
Okay, I will go ahead. On the properly responding to me, you said something that's very important, the role of indigenous people in protecting the environment and nature. And properly related to this COVID pandemic as another effect, for example, for the ones that are the elders, and they maybe bring the biggest knowledge on how to protect and so on. Yeah, I want to ask you one of your vision about that, and which can be, in your opinion, the way to come out with this, maybe to transfer the knowledge and to help to preserve this precious knowledge that they have.
Well, I think that a very important thing that we have to fight these days is the, I don't know how to say that in English, adultization. I don't know. Is that everything seems to be around being an adult, a white northern country adult, and preferably a male. So everything that is not that is not taken into account, not even youth voices, indigenous voices, elderly voices. So I think it's very important that we take into account the traditional knowledge, because elderly people have been here, many of them for over a century. So they have more information, not only about culture and tradition, but on climate events, how to manage the natural resources we have. So since everywhere in the world is different, for example, living in Canada is not the same as living in Spain, we have different cultures, we have different traditions that are adapted to these places. For example, my grandmother doesn't have the same, I don't know, natural resources management that a person in Canada would have. Here in Spain, in the south where I live, we don't have much snow, so we are not used to work in the snow. We are used to work with dry, with the lack of rain. So we are adapted to these kind of things. While in Canada, maybe they are adapted to work in the snow. So I think it's very important that we ask those people about the traditions, about the natural resource management they have in the area, because the more the more information we have, the more adapted we'll be, and the more prepared we would be to face the changes in the future.
Thank you very much. It comes another question, but as before making the question, I want to leave the floor also to the participants.
Hello, I have a question. Is there any link with indigenous culture and also the African culture?
Sorry, could you repeat?
Is there any link with the indigenous culture and African culture?
If I understood, you are asking me if there's any link between indigenous culture and African culture. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
Well, I think in Africa there are many indigenous communities. I'm sure they will have their own culture and that they will be adapted to their own, I don't know, biodiversity environment. So I think they should definitely know how to manage and how to deal with the different changes facing the climate change. If it's that's answering your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
If I can put a point properly on this, maybe sometimes we think that indigenous people are just one of the Amazon, but indeed the indigenous people are all the indigenous people in the world that preserve ancient cultures, preserve ancient environment. There are, for example, there are the Eskimos that are in the polars, or other in Europe from for example, the Falk Islands also have um, um, a strong traditional culture, and they are considered also indigenous people. So when we use the term indigenous people, we refer to several cultures, not only the one in Latin America. But correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah.
Yes, I agree with you. We refer. I'm a biologist. I'm not sociologist or anthropologist. We may have like more, like scientific approach to this. But I think when we refer to indigenous communities, we are referring to people who are locals. To the place. If you want to make like a point of where those people live, you should like indigenous people from, I don't know, from the Arctic, or indigenous people from Amazonia, or indigenous people from North Africa. I think you have to be specific because it's not the same as saying, I don't know, Caucasic, or I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. This I'm not very familiar with this. Sorry.
Thank you, Sarah. So before running into the roundtable, I will ask you one last thing.
Okay.
You say that, for example, it's important to valorize also the indigenous knowledge for fighting climate change. And I want to just mention an anecdote that it comes in my mind when I was in COP. I was in COP 24, and was astonishing for me that finally the substance that is the main scientific body on the UNFCCC make an agreement more on local indigenous platform rather than the IPCC report. And that's also, there was a strong speech from one indigenous chief that said, our knowledge finally will save you also in the scientific world, no? And it comes in my mind properly on how it's important to preserve this kind of knowledge, to integrate with the scientific knowledge that we have. Sometimes we underestimate the role of this kind of traditions and so on. But finally, they're the base ground also for science and so on.
Yes, I totally agree with you. In fact, I was in COP25 when I attend EPCC panel. I was kind of shocked because there was one very like angry scientific saying that we should all take a look back to the tradition of indigenous collective, to the traditional resources management that elderly people were doing, referring to your last question. because that was the base of modern science. Like, we all know that, for example, when we are taking an aspirin, the chemical formula was derived from willow. So I think it's important to, I don't know, learn how to make a relationship again with nature, since living in cities seems to be very distant from what we came from. And sometimes we forget that we are part of it.
Thank you very much, Sara. If there are some questions, even though in a few minutes we will start the roundtable also with the speaker of the other session that is running in parallel. So we are trying also to make this parallel session in this climate social forum, properly, like thinking that we do not stop to talk of several arguments also together as we did in the normal conference. But now, yes, I repeat, take the chance to make Sara some questions, and then we can run to the roundtable. In the meanwhile, I want to really thank Sara for joining the Climate Social Forum, and also for being so prepared to also respond to the possibility to join us and to help us in understanding the rights of nature. Thank you very much, Sara. It's been a pleasure to. Okay, so if there aren't any other question, now let's close the discuss the topic session. Just remember, we have these three structure organization that the first round of talks is about discussing the topic. Then we have like round tables, and then discuss about solutions. I will stop this, and we will wait for the round table. Okay, preparing the live stream. Okay, let's start. So welcome to all, and this is the Climate Social Forum. This initiative wants to create properly an agora for talking and continuing fostering the solution and speech about climate change, but not only climate change and climate crisis, but also the several crises that are connected to this great problem that we are facing now in this historical moment. We want to also to address the social aspects of climate change, and also the connection between climate, health, environment, and so on. Today, we are in the session related to the rights of indigenous people and the rights of nature and also the human rights. We are here with Sara Garcia of Codenaf. Thank you for joining, Sara.
You're welcome.
Marco Bertaglia of Extinction Rebellion.
Hello.
And Rodrigo Andrade of Energy Mining Dialogue. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Domenico. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you to all. Just starting, we are coming from two sessions in which we address the rights of nature and the rights of indigenous people and the problem of the loss of biodiversity. Of course, these two problems are very intertwined and connected. And I want just to start the discussion, giving you to each one of you for 1-2 minutes, try to focus one or few points that you have in mind thinking about these two problems. I will start with Sara. Make your brief statement or if you have some information that you want to share on the topic, and then we can go to Rodrigo and Marco.
Okay, so I think if we are talking about how to conserve a species, we have to take 3 things into account. The second one is getting to understand how the extinction of the species affect us. And the third thing we should take into account is to share and tell people to create collective consciousness, make a social demand for politics. And I think this is the most important thing, because we are not surprised that people who understand the value of a forest or even a tree react in anger to the possibility of its destruction, while to others it may be acceptable. So because they do not understand its value, because they lack the knowledge that would be otherwise allow them to value it. These 3 things into account, maybe we can make a plan to conserve a species and make a more sustainable world.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you very much. Then the turn of Rodrigo.
Thank you, Domenico. Hi, everyone. A few weeks ago, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, told that the humanity is in war.
Sorry, Rodrigo, we cannot hear you. Just open the mic. We cannot hear you. No, we cannot hear you. Sorry. Okay. So I'll give the floor to Marco.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope Rodrigo can solve it, because all of a sudden we couldn't hear him anymore. So it's really a technical issue. So yes, basically, I would like to start from something I've already said, but maybe it's worth repeating, that it's not just as normal activists or people who want change at all costs that are unreasonably demanding the impossible. It's the very top-level scientists selected by the governments in the United Nations, in the level of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, which is just the same as the IPCC for climate, but in the case of ecology and biodiversity, as said, we need, the only way to achieve sustainability is to have transformative changes. And they were very specific what they meant with transformative changes. They meant a thorough revision, entire change of all we do, politically, economically, technically, socially, transforming completely, including the paradigms and values. This is found in the global assessment of IPBES. So we really need to realize that we have to change the way we do almost practically everything we do. So it's not just create a park here or there, protect one species, change, make tiny adjustments without being having the willingness to actually reverse deep down inside all aspects of how we interact with the living planet. So we need to change the way we interact with the living planet so that our behavior, the way we farm, the way we grow food, the way we transport ourselves and how much we transport ourselves and the things we use are in line with the law of ecology. And to do so, we need to take back into communities at all levels the power to make decisions how we use this. And this is connected to something dreadful that is going on. We've mentioned human rights that are connected to ecocide. If we think at the sheer number of environmental activists that are killed throughout the world because they go against vested interested, powerful interests. This needs to change as well. We can do it. We can do it if we unite our fights.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you. Maybe let's see if Rodrigo can join, but I think that she's not joined still. Okay. And taking in consideration what you said, both Sara and Marco, you mentioned also the importance of knowledge and the importance of joining the forces and joining the efforts. In the previous session with Sara, we discussed about the role of indigenous knowledge. And you, Marco, mentioned the importance of science, and also science is somehow takes the same conclusion that indigenous knowledge is giving us from several centuries. But nowadays we are at a turning point, and it seems that the roads can join. In your opinion, which could be the way on how, for example, valorize the role of indigenous knowledge, in consideration also the scientific efforts that we have directed today? How to join the forces, for example, with these two type of knowledges? The ones who want to respond first.
Okay. I want to introduce a point about ecosystem services that I don't know if you are familiarized with. Ecosystem services are processes provided by nature that support life. This includes the composition of waste, pollination, water purification, moderation of floods. Those ecosystem services are often overlooked, are not generally valued as part of the economy until they cease to function. When economic value is assigned to these services, it is often extremely high. So I think for us Europeans to get to value knowledge, it is important to put an economic price. It's very sad, in my opinion, but it is sometimes the only language we all know. So, for example, yesterday I was reading a paper. There was a research made by Galai in 2009. I don't know if you are familiarized with that. He said that if the pollination services stop, it will cost approximately about $200 billion a year. So I think this is a way we should, I mean, if you are talking about numbers, you are making an impact on people. And this is a way people could react and start to put in value traditional knowledge such as pollination, or I don't know, traditional practices that are often associated with the conservation of ecosystem services.
Thank you, Sara. Marco?
Well, I'm afraid that I'm not entirely on the same page, even though I've mentioned this ecosystem services myself. For instance, think that the value of pollination is much, much larger than that mentioned by this research. It's almost unimaginably larger, because without pollination, not only we lose a lot an awful lot of the food we can have and produce, but we lose to a degree of loss of that specific place in the trophic change in the ecological equilibrium that we don't know if the equilibrium would continue to stand. So if there is a potential for entire destruction, then it would, the idea of the value to that, it doesn't make any sense anymore. And that's something that is happening already. And that's something that the traditional indigenous knowledge know. And that's why the IPBS said what the thing I've mentioned, that we must even change values and paradigms. Because with these values, we need this money number, and I know Sarah is right. Well, I agree with Sarah in a sense that with this number, you can move ideas because we are so attached to these strategies. But if we don't change those approaches, so if we don't change those paradigms, then we fail. And it's not surprising that this went into the global assessment report of the IPBS. Precisely, I would dare to say, although there are scientists that already share this view also, even as I do, precisely because this was the first time such a huge international effort institutionalized by the UN involved a lot of indigenous knowledge, directly and proactively involved in the discussions and in the assessments, in the evaluation, at all levels possible, indigenous knowledge from all continents. And this is, for me, this is what informed the ideas that went into these transformative changes that are highlighted.
Thank you, Marco. Thank you. Sara, do you want to add something?
Well, I agree with Marco in the thing that we have to make sacrifices and that we have to change everything from the base to the top. I think that one fact that we can learn from all the coronavirus and pandemic management is the acceptance of the need to make sacrifices and accept restrictions for both the common good and the personal well-being. That maybe it could help to fight the climate crisis. And maybe this is very optimistic, but changes in values does not occur linearly. Crisis events can also be used as opportunities for change, such as the pandemic we are facing now.
Thank you, Sara. And I'll take properly this last point, the situation of the pandemic. We addressed the point also in other session, also at the beginning of the Climate Social Forum with the keynote speech of Remedios Mastroianni. He underlined how it's important to understand that the health of nature, like the integrity of nature, stands also in the integrity of human health. And this pandemic is properly teach us how, for example, the role of the biodiversity is important also for phenomena like zoonosis and so on. And I will start with this with Marco, trying to get in the point properly on biodiversity problem. And if you can like add some points on the importance of biodiversity and maybe how could be important to make the rights of nature a human right.
Well, there is one thing I would like to say in relation to the pandemic and how it is connected to the ecological crisis. There's been this fantastic research a year before the pandemic, it was published, showing directly how we have increasing risks from new viruses because of habitat fragmentation. We destroy habitats, we fragment them, and what happens is that we isolate several engines of co-evolution. Co-evolution meaning the joint evolution on one hand of the animals that hosts pathogens and resist to pathogens and evolve to survive and become stronger. You know, this theory, it's very famous. The evolution of pathogens that try to differentiate and attack and be stronger. So it's a continuous co-evolution. Then if we isolate these engines and multiply several isolated islands of co-evolution, what happens is we increase the biodiversity. It's improperly used, but to give an idea, we increase the strength of the viruses and the bacteria. So we increase the probability that there are more aggressive viruses and bacteria transported then by generalists like the mice or mosquitoes and so on into contact with domesticated animals and human beings. So we actually increase it, and it's something that we do reverse. What happens is the importance of biodiversity is that it increases the likelihood that people and animals and plants can resist. It increases, well, biodiversity is also important because we can have vast arrays of materials and elements and even medicines that come from transformation that have the geological scale of evolution, and we can wipe them out in a second. You've probably have heard about the story of if you put the life of the planet in 24 hours, we are there since 3 seconds, and in 3 seconds we destroyed what's been built over 24 hours. So that's dreadful. And when we think of the pandemic, let's keep in mind that while we decrease the biodiversity, the favorable biodiversity, by fragmenting habitats, we're increasing the improperly used biodiversity of viruses and pathogens. So we maximize the likelihood that we are stronger attached with less defense to counteract them.
Thank you. Sara?
Well, I agree with you totally, and I think that we should remember that we are not separate from biodiversity. We are one. We are distracted from the fact that we have computers and we live in cities and we ride on buses, and we think that we are superior to a rabbit or a tree or even a mosquito. So I think the first thing that we have to think about is that we are not anymore in a tree, like the human is on the top and the other living things are the rest of the tree. We are a circle. We are part of the biodiversity, and we have a responsibility for being living things to protect this, because we are all interconnected.
Thank you. And so one last question, then let's give the floor also to the participant. The very goal of Climate Social Forum is also discuss about solution and action to improve the situation. We share also, and I share in the chat, some track documents, guiding documents that can help also the participants to suggest ideas and proposals and so on. In this direction, I want to ask you which could be also the instruments that at the international level or at the local level or national level we can take to prevent from eco-crimes, from loss of biodiversity, and to preserve finally the rights of nature and the rights of less disadvantaged like indigenous people. So Marco, if you want to go.
Thank you, Domenico. I think that we only have one possibility to avoid the worst. It's to come together, demanding with mass civil, non-violent civil disobedience, demanding that governments create and are led by the decisions of citizens' assemblies. So citizens' assemblies give the power to citizens to be informed by the science, listen to all the stakeholders, and then with a proper facilitation, professional facilitation in small groups, give room to the voice of all to be equally heard and take together the decisions that are needed. So once we are informed, then we know that some decisions must be taken and we own the decision. And we're not influenced maybe by the play of electoral games and lobby games, because we selected at random, like in ancient Athens. So we out of that game and we can take the decisions that are needed. So this is for me the solution, because technical solutions are there. We've been building houses that uses 0% to maximum 10% of energies of similar houses for decades. We've been knowing about agroecology for decades. We have indigenous knowledge and we had innovative knowledge that sometimes combine both the academic research and the indigenous knowledge, like Miguel Altieri, the Pope of agroecology, did as long ago as the early 1980s with indigenous knowledge in the Andes of Latin America. So we know how to do it. So we need the power back into citizens' hands to implement the solutions that are there.
Thank you, Marco.
I agree with Marco, but I think that the most important thing to do when you give power to citizens is have responsible citizens, and you can only achieve that by giving them education. And I think education is the base to everything, to everything. You have to educate people, but not educate them in a way that they are imposed to be environmentally conscious, but in a way that you make them curious about nature and the environment. And also another thing I think is important is we live in a world where consumerism is important. And nowadays it has been demonstrated that what you ask for, companies are going to create it for you. So if people, educated people and responsible citizens ask for sustainable things, companies and governments are going to give it to you. For example, I remember that years ago, we didn't have vegan menus at McDonald's, and now we have them. It's not that this is sustainable, but this is an example of one thing that a group of people ask for and the company gives to them. It also has the problem of greenwashing, but this is the reason why we need educated people and responsible citizens to ask and demand things responsible.
Thank you very much, Sara, and thank you very much, Marco. Now let's take these last 5 minutes to question from the floor. So I kindly invite also the participant to ask a question or to propose also something. You can use both the chat, or eventually you can raise your hand and take the floor. So the floor is for the participants. I saw Laura was sharing something. Maybe Laura, do you want to take the floor, or do you have some questions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so as Sara was saying that how nowadays we get what we ask for, right? So I guess a part of that is based on the trends and how they impose certain economic aspects of our economies, I guess. But in short, what I was going to ask is, what can we do, or how do we present our ideas, these concepts, everything that is going on related, climate crisis, environmental crisis, uh, ecological crisis, how do we present it in such a manner that, you know, average people or the average citizens find it compelling to say, you know what, I want that. I want to uh, get one of those products or ideas or services, or I want to at least contribute to that. How do we, you know, sell that idea based on an economy that pretty much is, you know, marketing? So what do we do?
Thank you, Lenin.
Well, if I may,
Okay, go ahead.
my suggestion is the first thing is listen. And listen to the needs beyond right and wrong that people express. And once you did that, once you've done that, instead of selling a ready-made solution, devise together strategies that meet both the needs that people express and the need of nature, but show them that it is possible, because it is. I say that because I know it is, that it is possible to meet their needs better than they're doing now. Because what people are generally scared is that because we want to protect nature, we would not protect their needs or satisfy their needs. And this is the dialectic that has been input in our mind of the dualistic world. It's either or. It's either the economy or the environment. That's nonsense. There's no economy on a dead planet. And there's no environment if we cannot eat. But we can, we do. So it's possible to do that. Now, that's why I mentioned Citizen Assembly, and I didn't delve deeply into that idea, but I want to say something here still, that it's a dialogical system. It's a system where we listen and we are listened to. And that's the only way we can go ahead together. And education, yes, I agree with Sarah, education is necessary, but not top down. And it's actually one of the main parts. If I've copy pasted some links into the charts, if you want to look and delve deeply into what we mean by citizen assembly, there's an education phase or a learning phase where we do get information and input so that now we are able to deliberate based on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco.
I totally agree with Marco, and I think that we are living in a very polarized world where people and the economists present us like, you want the last iPhone or you want to live in the cave. There's no middle term, there's no gray, there's just black and white. So I think it's important to talk to people about, this is not about living in the caves, start, I don't know, hunting again, doing your own fire, but this is more about not buying a phone every year, not buying a fast fashion. This is more about daily things, that, I don't know, an apocalyptic world where only green people lives in caves.
Thank you, Sara. Just to remind that
May I just express just a simple thought?
yes, go ahead, Giancarlo.
I'm not an expert in biological problems, but I think we must be grateful to all the scientists who analyze the problems and disseminate informations. But now we are all committed, I think, to drawing the conclusions of these informations. And since the positions, the points of resistance are above all economic and political, we must make better use of the tools that democracy offers to us to elect people who are truly determined to change the situation into parliaments. If we find ourselves in this situation, I think now, it's mainly because we were not good at this task of being attentive and responsible voters. We must educate ourselves to democracy, I think.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Just before giving the floor to the speaker, I want to say that there will be proper a track on education to democracy and integral ecology on the 20th, and there will be also like a session dedicated to civic assembly. So thank you very much for the discussion, and let's continue also further on that point. But now I will give the floor to the speaker, just adding one question that was in the chat: how we can push the politician to take strong and quick decisions. Who want to go first? Sarah,
I see that Marco has already answered, and I totally agree with him because I think that asking things like, I don't know, like, please, would you mind, I don't know, making some more green politics? This is not happening. This is not helping, and we are there since the 80s, since I don't know, and this is something that is not happening. So it's like all the things. If you want something strong solutions and quick, you have to go to the streets. There's no other thing you can do, in my opinion.
Thank you, Sarah. Marco?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I saw it written, so I had the reflex to write as well. But yes, if you convince at least 3.5% of the population, which is a lot, because if we speak about Italy, it's 2 million people. If you convince 2 million people to block the capital for 10 days in a row and cause great disruption, then maybe they'll notice, and then maybe they'll come to terms with what you request. And what you request then is very important. I would like us to demand, as I said earlier, citizens' assemblies. So not to demand one specific solution that I, from my great intelligence and my research, say we must do like that. I want us all to decide together, because that's the only way we can then really implement what we decide.
Thank you.
So yes, let's join nonviolent mass civil disobedience. Let's do that. And when we are 2 million in a country like Italy, then we'll achieve change. It's sure. So the most difficult part is to get to 2 million with just a couple of hundreds now in Italy, for example.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you, Sarah, for this beautiful roundtable. Thank you very much. I invite you also to follow up the next session of the Climate Social Forum, sharing with you also the links for the Zoom chats and so on. So, if there aren't any other questions, just the last call, we can stop here, and we can like appreciate and express our gratitude for the speaker to join the Climate Social Forum. I invite also the participant once again to put their inputs. Today with this session also, and the other session before on adaptation, we get a lot of inputs to propose, to have ideas and so on. Take the chance to use the document also to speak your voice up. And thank you very much for the speakers, to Sara and Marco. And let's continue with the next session. We have a session on indigenous people properly with Moran Solbrosa. And thank you very much. And let's follow up Climate Social Forum.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Bye.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Grazie. Okay.